Hello everyone and welcome yet again to another episode of Lunch Guide. I'm your host Chef Andy, and today, as I mentioned, we're going to be working with some very beautiful ingredients. We're going to be bringing a very beautiful classic British dish to this table, and you're also going to manage to be able to see how the simple process is done. But before we get to that part, I will proceed to introduce the ingredients before us to give you a nice beautiful breakdown of what to expect. So I'm going to start from the very front with some salt and some paprika powder. You're also going to require some finely chopped cucumber and finely chopped red onion. You'll require about 300 grams of tilapia fillet, about 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise, and about 2 potatoes cut to strips. You're also going to require some flour, some peppercorns to crush, some oil to cook with, and last but not least, some soda water to make your batter with. But before we get to that part, we're going to take a short break now, allowing you to grab your pens and papers if you're taking notes, and we'll see you after a very short while. Don't touch that dial. Hello viewers and welcome back to the show. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've just been introducing the ingredients to my right or to your left, and we're going to be working on a very simple fish and chips dish. Remember, as I mentioned, the recipe is actually a very beautiful British inspired technique of making battered fish, and I'm just going to begin by showing you how to make your batter first. So very importantly for this recipe, you'll require a sieve and a bowl. Remember, it's very important to always sift your flour. Always a good way of making sure that your flour is completely free from any debris or any foreign body. So proceed to sift that into a bowl and discard anything that remains. Right, so very simply into your bowl, we're going to begin by seasoning our flour. So I'm going to add some salt and of course crush in some black peppercorns. Next, proceed to grab your soda water, and using a whisk you'll proceed to add your liquid in small amounts, but always proceed by mixing your flour and your seasoning first, and proceed to add your soda water in small amounts, and this will always aid in making sure that you don't add too much at once. And what you're looking for is more like a pancake batter consistency, so it should not be too runny, otherwise it will not hold on to your fish. Proceed to add a little more. So for this recipe I reserved about 300 ml of soda water. But remember, depending on how much flour you're going to be using, you may actually want to make the alterations on your recipe. And for those who may actually be looking at having a nice, more colorful batter, you can always improvise by adding some chopped parsley or chopped coriander. You can also add a bit of food color to your batter. It will always also give a nice, beautiful finish right after the frying process. Right, so your batter should actually be nice and thick right at this stage. So we're going to stop adding any more liquid at this stage. And next up, we're going to proceed to trim our fish. Remember, particularly for pieces of fish that you may be frying, you may actually want to cut them a little bit smaller But for this particular reason, I'm going to be trimming off the edges of the fish. Also take off the end of the tail and proceed to slice through, right through the center. Proceed to do the same with your other piece. Always making sure to get a nice even trim, of course, and always be very, very punctual and vigilant in making sure that you also don't trim too much of your fish and waste too much. Right, so simple as that. Now remember, particularly when working with fish or any particular meat, always proceed to make sure that your meat is completely dry before mixing that with any particular mixtures. Remember, the water could actually taint the consistency of your butter, and it will actually really give you a very bad desired result. So be sure to actually pat your fish a little bit just before seasoning. Right, simple as that. Once done, proceed to season your fish with a bit of salt. Remember, particularly for salt, salt has a very beautiful way of really absorbing the liquid in the fish, and this will also make sure that the water actually comes to the surface and allows for a nice, beautiful frying process. So proceed to turn that around and proceed to season with salt. Also season with some black peppercorns. And of course, also something to always mention, especially if you're going to be seasoning something off your board, always try and make sure to just wipe the excess with your piece of meat. Remember, that also allows for it to give it a nice even coating and allows for the for your seasoning to permeate really well. Alright, so once that's done, we're going to proceed to heat our oil in a pot. We're just going to allow that a few minutes to heat up. And while that continues, proceed to grab a pair of tongs and proceed to add your fish to the butter. Of course, always making sure that your butter covers your fish completely all the way to the top. Using your tongs, proceed to mix that into your butter really easily. Of course, always working with tongs always allows for you to avoid contaminating your food. So very, very importantly, if you do have a pair of tongs, do avoid working with your hands. Right, just keep tossing that in there, and while your oil proceeds to heat up, you can allow your fish to sit in your butter very briefly. So very importantly, turn your board around, change your knife if you have to. Remember, this always allows for you to also avoid contaminating your work surface or your food as you work. And now next we're going to proceed to mix our very, very simple tartar sauce. So for this you will require a small handful of some finely chopped cucumber. Proceed to add some finely chopped red onion. Now for those of you who may be looking at being a little fancy with your mixture as well, you can actually add a bit of anchovy fillets in there. It will actually give it a nice, beautiful, permeable taste. You can also alternatively grate in a bit of egg as well. Remember, these are all techniques of enriching your mixture. Now proceed to finish adding your mayonnaise. Season with some black pepper and one small pinch of salt. Remember, salt really brings out the flavors of your seasoning in your bowl. Now all you need to do is proceed to mix that for about a minute. Alright, once that's mixed, you can proceed to allow that to rest on the side for a few minutes. And now once your oil is hot, very, very simply proceed to run your fish through the butter once more, making sure to get a nice even coating. Allow it to just drizzle, allow the excess to drizzle off very, very softly. and proceed to add that to your oil. And remember, one particular checkpoint for frying anything in butter, remember, once you add anything to your oil, it will sink to the bottom very, very fast. But one particular checkpoint, remember, anything that is cooked in butter will always float once cooked. Now proceed to do the same with your last pieces. And also something to mention, always proceed to add small quantities at a time. Remember, one particular thing that happens a lot of times is you may actually add too much into your oil and it may actually cool off your oil. So be very vigilant when frying. Always add small batches at a time. But remember, if your pot can actually take the whole mixture and allow your pieces to float and cook really, really well, proceed to do the same. So just going to give those a shake in there. And remember, this should actually cook until golden brown. Remember, the color is one particular pointer as well for checking for doneness. The second one, as we mentioned earlier, is basically allowing for the pieces of fish to float to the surface of your oil, and give them anywhere between 5 to 6 minutes of cooking. Remember, white meat cooks very, very fast, so be very, very vigilant when working with white meat. So this is about nicely colored now. They should be almost done. But very importantly, always toss them continuously in your oil. Remember, this always allows for an even cooking. And now, as that continues, we're going to proceed to drain our potatoes. So very, very importantly, especially when working with fries, very important to actually drain your potatoes. Remember, there is one particular hazardous step, especially when oil comes into contact with water. It may cause a fire. You may actually burn yourself. So be very vigilant when working with the water and oil. So very, very simply proceed to allow your potatoes to drain very, very quickly in that bowl, and you can set that aside while you now pay your attention back to your fish. And now this is now almost ready. We're going to start taking out the pieces one by one, and very, very importantly, if you actually have a very, very difficult time paying attention to your meal, or particularly keeping time, always handy to have a stopwatch around the kitchen, or rather have a wristwatch, as I do on my end. This always helps you to keep time. Right, so we're going to start taking those pieces out one at a time, always lifting and allowing for the excess oil to drip back into your pan. And proceed to set on some parchment paper for draining. Right, so just to get the next pieces out. Very important to actually allow the oil to flow back into your pot. Remember, oil is a bit costly, and especially if you allow most of your oil to drain onto the paper, it may actually cost you a bit of money at the end of a long process. So very, very important to always allow the excess oil to just fall back into your pan. And at this stage, you can proceed to turn your oil off completely from the heat. Just to allow that last and final piece to drain. Right, so very simply, we're going to allow those to drain on some parchment paper very quickly on the side. But before we proceed, always also very handy to have an extra sieve, just to get those small specks of butter that are still floating in your oil. Just run your sieve right around your pot, and you should be able to actually remove all those pieces that are on the float. And proceed to discard those. Now remember, you're still going to be frying your potatoes, so very quickly return your pot back to the heat. Give your potatoes a shake, making sure that they are drained completely. And once that is done, we're going to proceed to discard the water. And again, very handy to have in your kitchen some parchment paper. Run that over your potatoes. That should allow for you to get all that excess liquid out completely. And proceed to add your potatoes to your oil. Alright, so while that continues, we're going to allow that to cook. We're going to also take a break and clean up our station. So we are going to ask you once more, please don't touch that dial. You definitely don't want to miss what's to come. See you after a very short break. Welcome back, viewers. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've just been finishing our beautiful fish and chips. We've got our fries now ready to come out, so I'm just going to proceed to take those out of the oil very quickly. Now you should be looking for something anywhere in that color, if you can be able to see those from the cameras. Nice, beautiful golden fries. Of course, very important to allow for them to drain before you take them out. And proceed to throw those into a bowl with some parchment paper. That should allow for you to drain them very, very quickly. And for those of you who may be also looking at a different option of serving suggestions, you can also serve that with anything in relation to rice or a light salad. That should also give you a nice, beautiful portion for your lunch. Or rather nice, beautiful, tantalizing dish. So once that's done, proceed to season with some paprika powder. Add to that some salt. And just toss everything in your bowl very, very quickly. And this can proceed to go into your bowl of choice. So I'm just going to allow those to fall very lightly into my side bowl there. Nice, beautiful options for bowls, especially if you're serving fries on the side or as an accompaniment. And now, very simply, proceed to add your fish to your plate of choice. So I'm going to be using a fish plate for this process. Just going to add one last piece at the top. And as you can see, nice, beautiful crunch on your fish there. But always important to just finish your dish with a bit of the tartar sauce. So I'm just going to scoop that onto the front of the bowl. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my simple version of English style fish and chips. Always very handy to actually just crush a bit of black peppercorns over your dish, and that will give a nice, beautiful crunch and also gives it a nice, beautiful amount of heat to the bite. So I'm going to thank you once again for tuning in today. For those of you who may have missed out on most of what we've done today, remember we do have our Facebook page, that is BrandPlus TV. You can be able to follow up anything you've missed on the show. You can also leave your comments on our Facebook page. We are always more than willing to hear back from you viewers at home. But from the studios, I'm going to take my nice short break now and enjoy my lunch. I hope you're also going to be doing the same. And until the next episode, I'm going to see you soon. God bless, and see you soon once more.